Hey everyone. In this series, we're just going to discuss or talk about DAX and using DAX in Power BI. So, just a series of videos on DAX. Let's start. The intention is, if you're a beginner, just to give you a heads up around DAX. So, let's get started. The first one is overview of DAX. So, what is DAX? DAX stands for Data Analysis Expressions. It consists of functions, operators, and constants that can be used in a formula or expression, and it can return one or more values. So if you're coming from the Excel world, you can think of it as formulas that you see in Excel. There are some commonalities and there are some new functions as well. It can be used to create tables, columns, or measures. So in DAX, you can create columns, you can create measures, or you can create tables. So the next point is basically DAX. Some of the similar formulas between DAX and Excel is, for example, sum, minimum, maximum, count, average. And where is DAX used? So DAX is used in Power BI, it is used in Excel Power Pivot, and it is used in SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular Model. Moving on to the next one. We've already spoken about it. DAX are a collection of functions and operators used for data analysis and calculations in Power BI, Power Pivot, and SQL Server Analysis services. I'll just talk through some of how you can group the DAX functions. You can have aggregate functions like sum, average, min, max. You can have logical functions like if, and, or. Text function like left, right, concatenate. Date time, so today will give you today's date. Filter functions, so these are used to set context like calculate. Time intelligence functions, total year to date. If you want to calculate, maybe for example, sales year to date, you can use this. And then there are statistical functions like median, standard deviation, so on and so forth. There are some functions like is blank, so if you want to check for blanks, is number, is text, is error. There are some trigonometric functions like some math functions and trigonometric functions. I have not put trigonometric functions, but math functions are here, so you can get absolute value using ABS. Ceiling, floor, so you can get the highest value using ceiling, and then floor, so on and so forth. Parent-child function like path and path item. And if you want to go through a detailed list, here's a reference that go to DAX function reference on Microsoft.com. So you can use this link. Moving on, so just an example, DAX. So sum is a DAX function. And the usage is that you use sum, open brackets, and then the column that you want to put in, and close the column. So in this, I have a table, I'm calling it sales table. So it has two columns, product and revenue. And if I want to calculate the sum of revenue, how I'll use it is I'll use sum, and then I'll do a reference to the table name and then the column name, and it will return the value to me. So this is an example. Another one is today, like we were talking about. If you wanted to get today's date, so you wanted to get current date, it will give you today. And a common usage is maybe you want to calculate the age. So you want to do a difference between date of birth and today's date, and you want the result output in year. So that's what this function does. Carrying on, so like we were talking, you can have calculated columns or measures. So in DAX, a calculated column is a column that you can add to an existing table in your data model, where the values are defined as an existing formula. So you define a column. So you say, I want to calculate a calculated column. You define the formula, and that value gets materialized in the table. And they are calculated for each row in a table. They can be used to add new columns based on existing data. So that, like I said, they'll be materialized. And useful for row by row operations. So we'll talk through this as we go. So here's just an example. So let's say we had a sales table, product and revenue, and I want to calculate sales tax. So I say I want to calculate a calculated column called sales tax. It will add a column based on this formula, where I've said sales tax is 10% of revenue. So it's just added that column, and that's materialized in the table. So just an example, measures. Measures are calculations used in data analysis that are evaluated based on filter context. So these values keep on changing depending on how your row level, how your page level filters operate, or how your visual level filters operate. So these are very contextual, and like key characteristics, they're dynamic. They're recalculated when data is filtered or sliced. They're contextual, and they're not stored in the data, so they're not materialized. So let's say you create a create a measure, it will not get stored in your table. You can see it on the pane and you can drag it and use it, but it's not a value just stored in the database. So for example, again, the same example, I have the sales table and I create a sales tax measure. You can see it has not been materialized, but you'll see it in the pane and it will get calculated when you drag it and use it. So just a quick overview between what's the difference between measures and columns. So context, there's a row by row. In case of columns, the context is row by row. Measure context is dynamic depending on the slicers and the filters on the page. Storage, so calculated columns are stored in the data model, measures are not stored. Calculation time, so they're calculated at data refresh time. So let's say you build a Power Query and then you say, okay, let's refresh the data. So that data will come and calculated column will get calculated at that point in time and it will sit with your data model. Measures will not get calculated at data refresh time. They will be at query time when you decide to use that specific column. So usage, used for fixed static values and used for dynamic calculations. So I've got an example. Let's say you want to get the full name, you have the first name and last name. Now that cannot change based on the context. So for the sake of example, let's say I use a context like current month or month of January. This will not change, but total sales will change. So in that case, you will go for measures for dynamic values, and in case of static values, you'll just go and use a calculated column. And then when to use which. So best for calculated columns are best for static, row level calculations, and these are best for dynamic context-aware calculations. This is stored. Calculated columns are stored in the data model. The measures are not stored in the data model, and are used for creating new fields. And measures are used in aggregations and calculations. So that's pretty much it. I hope you find this video useful to get an overview of DAX and measures and columns. I'll go into more details in the ongoing videos, but this is just a brief introduction. Thank you. Bye.